Hi friends! Today we're here to have a cozy chat about whether you, in real life, would choose to be friends with Ramza Beoulve of Final Fantasy Tactics. My goal here is not to provide something super scripted or to give you a synopsis of the game's plot. If you're here, then I'm assuming you already know those things. What I wanted to do in this video is to just have a vlog-type ramble about Ramza, because I really love Final Fantasy Tactics and I want to talk out loud about it. So I hope you'll grab a drink or a snack and pretend like you've known me forever and we're sitting around debating the good and bad parts of Ramza's personality. For this video, I'm only addressing Chapter 1 Ramza, and I'm looking at some of the decisions he makes. Not in chronological order though, because that's boring to me. So, when I think about Chapter 1 Ramza, one of the very first things that comes to my mind is the scene where he finally decides enough is enough, and he kicks Algus, or Argath, depending on which version you're playing, out of his party. So, this to me I feel like that's the first decision Ramza makes that's outside of his brothers or his academy training, and I guess it's where we start to really see who Ramza is, because up until this point he has sort of just been doing his best to be a good boy and do what he's told, and kicking Algus, okay, I guess I'll call him Algus for this video because I played this game back in the day and I always think of him as Algus, even though in War of the Lions they named him Argath. But anyway, up until that point, he'd been putting up with Algus just, saying things that Ramza didn't necessarily agree with and being horrible to pretty much everyone around him. And, you sort of got the impression that Ramza kept him in the party because he just didn't know if he had the authority to get rid of him at that point. Like, what would happen to Ramza if word got back to his big brothers that he kicked out the last surviving member of the Marquis's party. And, he of course doesn't know that Dysadarg is not exactly a big fan of the Marquis anyway at that point, but you sort of see how Ramza let things slide with Algus up until that point and kept turning his head and looking the other way. And then when we finally get to this scene where Algus just spouts horrible crap to Delita, telling him, I wouldn't save your sister, she's not worth it, like, why would our troops care if she dies? And, Delita at that point punches Algus in the face, and Algus turns to Ramza like, we're friends, right? You're gonna choose me over him, aren't you? Like, you're gonna tell him he shouldn't have punched me, and Ramza's just like, GTFO, buddy. And I mean, I'm happy that he did, and like I said, I feel like that's really the first part where you start to see Ramza become his own person, just a little bit, where he's like, my brother might not be thrilled about this decision I just made to kick out this guy from Limberry, but I'm doing it anyway because he's a trash bag and I don't want him around anymore. So, as far as that decision goes, and that part of Ramza's character development, I would absolutely give him a tally in the yes category. I would be friends with Ramza in real life based on this decision that he made. Alright, so the next scene that I want to think about is that Blades of Grass scene after Delita's sister has been kidnapped and Delita and Ramza are going off to try to rescue her, and they're, sitting there, the sun is setting, and Delita is expressing to Ramza how upset he is at how helpless he feels. And he's also, I feel like Delita at that point, perhaps he's not amazing at showing his feelings, but he does point out to Ramza, like, at least in his way, he's trying to show Ramza how upset he is. Like, this is his one remaining family member. Delita and Teedra lost their parents years ago. Delita, as far as blood relatives go, he has one, and it's Teedra. And here, she's been kidnapped by this group of rebels, and for all they know, she could be dead already. And Delita's frantic, he really just, he's going out of his mind. He's really concerned that his sister is going to die, and Ramza just can't match that energy for him. Ramza, I feel like at that point, I mean, it's almost like he's high. Like, when you watch the cutscene, Ramza's just sort of chilling, and he's like, oh, yeah, man, oh, did Argath's words trouble you? And he just, that scene, I don't know, maybe something was lost in translation from the original Japanese, but that scene, I am not a huge fan of Ramza. He just, I feel like when your best friend is that upset and is going through something that heavy, that you can't even, I don't know, even just like pretend to be a little more riled up than you are, show some solidarity. Ramza, I guess he's not great at expressing himself either, but the fact that Ramza is just like, oh yeah, man, that's rough. He's not like really showing enough emotion to be like, I'm here for you, Delita. Like, I recognize how much this sucks. I care about your sister too. He's not really giving Delita that, and I feel like you can see Delita's frustration there when he kind of explodes with the "will endeavor grant me an army" line, where Delita, I feel like Delita is just, even though he loves Ramza, he's slightly fed up with him at this point. Like, I may be about to lose my last remaining family member, and this is killing me, and you can't even, like, show any sort of heightened emotion in my, in solidarity with me. Like, come on, Ramza. So, that scene, at that point in Ramza's life, if that was all I had ever seen of him, I've gotta say no, I would not want to be friends with Ramza based on that point in his life and that scene and his statements and actions there. So here we have one strike against him. Another point where we really start to see who Ramza is as a person. Right now, I'm thinking about that scene where Ramza and his crew fight with Meluda and her crew, and she is pretty badly injured, and Argath is screaming at Ramza that they need to kill her now, that it's her or us, we can't leave her alive, she's our enemy, blah blah blah, all that Algus stuff that he likes to say. So, in that scene, Delita, I think, says something along the lines of, like, Ramza, I can't see how she is our enemy. Delita is kind of understanding where the Corpse Brigade is coming from. Like, they're like, we have no food, and you guys did not give us our pay for all of our army service. So, yeah, we're rebelling because we have been left with nothing, and we feel that that's our only choice. So, Ramza right here is basically asked to choose who he sides with in this sort of political situation, Algus or Delita, and thankfully Ramza chooses to side with Delita, and he wants to let Meluda go, understanding, like, she chose to fight us, but maybe she really isn't exactly our enemy. Like, maybe their cause actually has something to it. So in that situation, I was very happy that Ramza made that choice. It shows him to be someone that I would want to hang out with in real life. So right there, Ramza gets a point in the yes column. I would be friends with Ramza based on that decision. Okay, now I'm going to take us all the way back to the start of Chapter 1. And by that I mean, like, the start of the military academy, not all that stuff that happens right at the beginning of the game where you get a flash forward with Agrius and everything. Not talking about that, just talking about when we first see them at the military academy. So, Ramza here, he really, I mean, I know he's only 16 when the game begins, but he really does not show himself in the best light, in my opinion. Delita starts talking to him about what's going on politically in their world, and, the concerns that they're facing, and the fact that they're about to go into battle. And Ramza's responses are basically like, what? Who? oh no, I don't know who that is. What's going on? He's just so oblivious. And like, I get it, he's a nobleman's son, he's probably been a little bit pampered up till this point in his life, even though he's training to be a soldier. But it boggles my mind, like, how are you going to be that oblivious about what's going on in the world when you are literally about to go kill people in a battle? Like, you'd think you'd at least want to have just the faintest idea of what's going on, being in the situation that Ramza and Delita are in. And it's not like Ramza has no access to the information, because Delita has all the information. So, you can kind of see that Delita was the sort of person who pays attention, whereas Ramza just kind of has his head in the clouds and is like, oh, I was born rich. Everything's going to be okay for me, right? I don't really need to listen to all of this. And again, I know he's only 16. Like, that's honestly probably pretty normal behavior for a lot of teenagers who are smart, good people. But when you're playing the game, and then, oh gosh, okay, and let's talk about when they meet in battle, and Ramza's just cry of, surrender or die in obscurity, and it's just, like, he doesn't even know why these people are fighting. He hasn't taken the time to figure out why these people are fighting him. He's just like, oh, well, okay, the instructor at my academy says bad man over there, so I go stab bad man. Alright. And it's a little painful, I feel like if I met someone like Ramza, as he is in that scene, just going into battle, shouting threats, doesn't know who he's fighting or why they're fighting, but is just like, okay, I'll do it, and has just let himself be completely uninformed about everything. Like, if I met that person in real life, I'd probably be like, yeah, no, I don't really want to get to know you better. So that scene gets Ramza a no in the would I be friends with him column. Now flashing forward again, I guess I'm not looking at one particular scene, but what I'm looking at is throughout chapter 1, every time Algus and Delita get into it, in an argument, or just, Algus saying all his prejudiced crap, and Delita, complaining or arguing with Algus, how Ramza, he spends most of that time just trying to play peacekeeper. And regarding that decision, I think I'm really neutral, because I guess I do see where he's coming from. Like, he's a teenager who's been put in a leadership position that is not easy, and Delita's an old friend of his, whereas Algus is, well, even though the Marquis is missing, Algus is the last surviving member of this foreign party that was visiting Ramza's homeland. So I can see how Ramza would be concerned that ditching Algus or alienating him would possibly look bad on him and his family. Like, if the Marquis were to get rescued and find out that Ramza treated Algus badly, I could see how Ramza might think, oh, okay, this wouldn't go so well for me. And I also think, like, Ramza might just really want to see the best in everyone, and is kind of burying his head in the sand about Algus and all the horrible things he says and does. So Ramza ends up in this mediator peacekeeper role, where he tries to never completely side with Delita or completely side with Algus. He's kind of just desperately trying to keep the peace between the two of them. I mean, also partly so that Ramza himself doesn't have to deal with drama and doesn't have to deal with a full-on confrontation, which, again, is understandable. Like, not everyone is good with that sort of thing, so I can see why he would want to avoid it. So when I look at all of that, the fact that Ramza won't just step up and fully take Delita's side, up until the point, the fight where, what we talked about earlier, where Delita full-on punches Algus and Ramza finally takes a stand. But up until that point, Ramza really just lays low and tries to play peacekeeper mediator. And I'm actually not going to give him a point in either column here for as far as whether I would be friends with him, because I don't love that decision, but I can also completely understand why someone in his situation would take that approach, so I'm calling that completely neutral. No points gained or lost for that decision. Now finally, I guess I should say spoiler warning for the end of chapter 1, but honestly, if you're watching these videos that I'm making or planning to make about the Final Fantasy Tactics characters, you should really be familiar with the game enough that you cannot be spoiled, because I'm planning to talk about anything and everything, so if you're worried about spoilers, these videos just aren't quite for you yet, but I hope you'll come back when you finish the game. But anyway, on to the topic. The end of chapter 1, when we get to Fort Zeekden, and Algus murders Delita's sister. And, I mean, granted, he does it on the order of Ramza Beoulve, Ramza's brother, but it's still... I guess what it comes down to is that there's so much... there's so much, like, argument about whether Algus did it on purpose or not, because really, like, he shot the hostage, he couldn't have, possibly avoided doing that, like, shot a little higher, try to get the captive, like, really anything. He just... It's hard to say if Algus did it just because he was given the order, or if he did it because he's just a complete douchebag. So, I mean, that's anyone's guess, I suppose, but that happens, of course, and Ramza is left with this huge decision of side with his friend Delita, who has just seen his last family member murdered, or side with his own family, who just ordered that murder. And Ramza chooses... Well, I think he would have chosen Delita, but as you know, he wasn't really given that choice, because Delita disappeared in the fire, and Ramza didn't know that he survived, but ultimately Ramza chose not his family. He chose to leave the Beoulves and become his own person, and even took on his mother's maiden name to disassociate himself from the Beoulves, and, like, Ramza really took a big stand there. He helped kill Algus at the end of the battle. He acknowledged that Algus and everything he stood for was wretched and wanted to destroy it. And so, as far as that decision at the end of the game to disassociate himself from people that he had started to see as really quite evil, and to defend his friend Delita, and to leave his family, Ramza absolutely gets yes, I would be friends with him points for that. In fact, that decision alone, I think he gets like 2 yes, I would be friends with him points. So overall, in my assessment of Chapter 1 Ramza Beoulve, would I hang out with him in real life? Would I want to be friends with this guy? Yes, I absolutely would. I love Ramza Beoulve. I think he's wonderful, even if he is a little naive in the beginning of the game. So before I end the video, I'll tell you a little bit about my silly background here. I wanted a sort of cozy but spooky FFT vibe for the background, and I had to get a little creative with things I had around the house. So over here we have a Halloween castle, which I think was from Cracker Barrel, and it lights up, and LED candles, and this chocobo I believe was from Amazon. When I first bought it, it had a Christmas hat on it, but I took the Santa cap off for, well, I wanted it to look more like a actual chocobo from the game, which, I mean, this guy is a little doofy looking, but he does the job. And I ended up with, I think these are just little boxes to try to create the bar from Final Fantasy Tactics. So we have a little box bar and a little fake thermos next to our bartender, who is not the real bartender. I just had to make do with the characters I had. And these are perfume bottles back here, trying to create the back of the bar. And if you're curious about these perler characters that I have been having way too much fun playing with like a little kid all the time now that I have them, I actually ordered them on Etsy from Steve. His shop is called Blue Bomber Pixel Art, and I ordered nearly every Final Fantasy Tactics character that he had available on his shop, and they all came out great. I really love them, and I always kind of wished that they had more FFT characters for sale, so I like that, you know, Etsy can kind of fill the gap where those characters never existed. So I hope you liked this kind of cozy chat, rambling video about Ramza, and my plan is to do them about other characters as well, and, you know, even Ramza in future chapters, but also all of the other characters, because I just really love this game, and I don't really know anyone in my real life who would want to talk about it for hours, so I'm talking to a camera and putting it on the internet, and I would love it if you leave me comments on your opinions here. Would you be friends with Ramza? Do you agree or disagree with me on some of these points? And let me know why. And also let me know if there's a character that you would really like to see me do a video about next, because I'm open to suggestions. Thanks for hanging out with me if you've made it this far. Bye.